We continue with our examination of the book of Joshua. So if you would join me this morning in the 15th chapter, chapter 15 of the book of Joshua. And we are in the midst now of the second half of this book, the end of Joshua's life, where he now makes allocation of the land in Canaan, the territory west of the Jordan. This chapter recounts, chapter 15 that is, recounts the first allocation of the land in Canaan to the tribes of Israel. Now in chapter 14 last week, you remember that this process had already been described. We were already told in verses 1 to 5 how this was going to take place. We learned that it was going to be by lot, so they were going to be casting lots to determine not only the location but the size of each particular tribe. We learned that it was going to be overseen by Eleazar the priest, who would represent God, by the tribal heads, who would be representing the people in this arrangement, and then Joshua, who would mediate between them in the process. We learned that Reuben and Gad would not be included in this particular transaction because they've already received an inheritance on the eastern side of the Jordan. We also learned that Joseph's allotment will actually be split to his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, half of Manasseh, of course, which has already been allotted to them on the eastern side of the Jordan. And then finally, we learned that no land will actually be distributed to the Levites in this process. They will not be given a specific territory, but rather will be scattered amongst all the other tribes. Already some of them being scattered on the eastern side of the Jordan with the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and east of Manasseh. So this particular chapter begins this process of Joshua now allocating the land to the Israelite tribes on the western side of the Jordan. And chapter 15, the entirety of this chapter is dedicated to the allocation of the land in Canaan to Judah. So this entire chapter deals with just one tribe receiving an inheritance. And it is three parts in this chapter. The first part, verses 1 to 12, describe the boundaries of the space that will be allotted to Judah. Then in the middle, verses 13 to 19, we see the completion of the story of Caleb's allocation, which we began in the previous chapter, so we'll continue that story. And then finally, the last verses, verses 20 to 63, are a list of the cities that the clans of Judah will occupy in their space. So the boundaries, continuing the story of Caleb, and then a list of all the cities that the people of Judah will occupy. Now, here's what we're going to do. We're going to combine those first and third sections together, the boundaries and the cities, because there's a logical connection between those two things. There's a sense in which there's an allocation of territory by boundary, and then the actual city is a part of it. So we're going to combine those two together and look at that, and then we'll come back to that center part of the story of Caleb and pick it up where we left off last week. All right, so the first 12 verses, as I said, set the boundary markers. But a couple of things I would have you to notice first, even before we get into the details, and that is, first, there's no mention in the text, in chapter 15, verse 1, that this was done by lot. Okay, there's no mention of that. It just says the allotment for the tribe of Judah, according to their clans, reached southward to the boundary of Edom, etc. All right, so there's no mention of lots. But I'm convinced that it was a cast of lot that had caused this particular allotment to be made, that it was the first allotment to be made, and the particular space is determined by lot. And the reason I say that is because, well, that's what God had said was going to happen. It's specifically what was mentioned in the previous chapter, as well as a couple of times in the book of Numbers long before this. So it seems reasonable to me to assume that this first allotment was determined in that fashion, even though Joshua doesn't record it. Okay? So I'm assuming that the first lot falls, God in his ordination, sovereignly governing the falling of the lot, and the lot falls to Judah. Now, a second note that goes along with that is it makes perfectly logical sense that the Lord would make the lot fall to Judah first, to be allocated first. Now, we're going to come back to this thought more in a bit, but I'll have you notice something. According to Numbers 26:22, remember that list of, that census list that I read last week as our scripture reading? You remember? You've all memorized it since I left. If you remember, Judah was the largest tribe by number in that list, okay? 76,500 men over the age of 20 were included in the census in that chapter. Now, if you apply a conservative multiplier to that 76.5 to come up with the total population of Judah, and I'm going to use a 2.5 multiplier, that would be conservative. Could be as high as 5. But let's just use a conservative number of 2.5. You've got an approximate population in Judah about 190,000. The two closest tribes to Judah are Dan with 64,400 and Issachar with 64,300. I mean, they're virtually the same size, which means they have approximately, using the same multiplier, about 160,000. So Judah is at least 30,000 more people than the other two closest tribes. So this is the largest tribe by number. And you remember that God had specifically said that not only would the lot determine who goes when, but also the larger the tribe, the larger the space would be granted to them. That was also part of what it is that God was determining. Since Judah, therefore, is the largest tribe by number, it makes reasonable and logical sense that the lot would fall to them first. Now, just to play devil's advocate for a moment, and I don't give him much credit, but it's possible that they didn't actually do this by lot, that because Judah was simply the largest, they started with him. It's certainly possible. Because of the numbers in Numbers 26, it certainly could be reasonable that you said, okay, let's start with Judah because that's the largest tribe, and so we'll give them a space. But I'm inclined to think that it was done by lot because even the space itself was being determined, not just who went first. Okay, so either way, the bottom line is Judah is chosen first. But there's a third thing I want to have you also to note. At this point in the narrative, Joshua is simply recording the allocation of the land, not its occupation. What you see being recorded in Joshua 15 is the specific boundaries and places where Judah is going to live. But this narrative should not be read as though that's what the people of Judah then went and took. Okay? It's simply a recording of the actual process by which Eleazar and Joshua and the tribal leaders sat down and figured out where the tribes would go. It isn't until after Joshua dies that the people then get up and go occupy their territories. If you look at Judges chapter 1, you will notice that when the Lord then comes to the people of Israel after Joshua dies and says, okay, what are you going to do now? It is Judah, Judges 1, the entire chapter, Judges 1, Judah steps up and goes into the space allotted to them. That's after Joshua is dead. So this is just a recording of where Judah will eventually be. Now, when I say eventually, I don't mean that far into the future because we already know from earlier texts that Joshua was old and the Lord had said to him, okay, here's the last thing you're supposed to do before you die. So it's not going to take very long before Joshua will die and the people can go in. But just keep that in mind, okay? Now, let's talk about the boundaries of this particular land. To help you with this, I have printed a map on the back of your bulletin. You'll see it under sermon notes there. And the reason I'm including it is because this is difficult to picture without a map. The map that you have in front of you is a guess, okay? It's a best guess as to where Judah might have wound up. There are 4 borders, of course, to this territory listed in these verses 1 to 12. The southern border is the first mentioned. It is a great arc sweeping south from the southwest corner of the Dead Sea through the wilderness of the Negev and back up to the southeastern corner of the Mediterranean. So that's that big arc that you see at the bottom there. Judah's in green in the center. That big arc that you see there. The arc allows for the inclusion of the wilderness of Zin at the southmost point. You see that in verse 1b. The purpose was to make sure that that southern territory of Zin is included. Tim even read about Zin in that place. Okay. And the city of Kadesh Barnea is included. You see that on the map as well. It's sort of down there at the bottom. In verse 3, it's mentioned as being a part of this territory. So, in other words, this arc is down into the wilderness south as far as is inhabitable, quote unquote. Below that line, to the south of that line, is where the people of Israel wandered for 40 years in the wilderness. Below that line is where the people of Israel wandered during that 40 years where God was killing off the generation that had refused to go in. In fact, this is where the Israelites did send the spies, was straight up through this territory at the bottom. Okay, so the southern border is that great arc. The eastern border then, verse 5a, is simply the western edge of the Dead Sea. So just take that southwest corner, follow the Dead Sea up to the top where you see the Jordan come in. That is the eastern border. Very simple. The northern border is mentioned next then. It starts in 5b through 11, and it's the best way to describe it is a meandering line moving from the top of the Dead Sea due west to the Mediterranean. Now, if you read all of verses 5 to 11, and I'm not going to, but if you read all those verses, what you have is this sort of thing. I'm going to go to here and this place, and go to here, and eventually wind up at the sea. All right? So it's a meandering line that goes across. It basically goes straight west, although it has a slight tilt to the north, but it's basically just going from the top of the Dead Sea across to the Mediterranean. Now, one thing I will have you notice is that the line goes under the city of Jerusalem. All right, that's mentioned specifically in verse 8. We'll come back to that thought more in a moment. But the city of Jerusalem, now occupied by the Jebusites, will actually be allocated to the tribe of Benjamin when that tribe is allocated land. You see that in chapter 18 and verse 28 later in this book. So that line goes across, but Jerusalem is not at this time included in Judah. Now, the city will eventually become part of Judah when the tribes of Benjamin and Judah coalesce, in essence, into one in the days of David. But for now, it does not belong to Judah. Finally, the western border is simply the eastern edge of the Mediterranean, from down in the corner down here in the south and west, following the Mediterranean, Egypt, north through the territory of the Philistines, which includes the cities of Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ashdod, up to the city of Jebneel. So you see just follow the sea along the edge. All right, so you have an arc along the bottom, up the Dead Sea, across the top, through a meandering line, across land, and then down along the Mediterranean. That's the space that encompasses Judah. The allocation comprises more than 5,000 square miles of space. I read a couple of places online that only attribute it to about 2,300, but I did the math. I took the picture that you have in your bulletin, put it in a computer program, and counted the square miles. It's well over 5,000 square miles. Baldwin County, by the way, is about 2,027, so this is at least double the size of Baldwin County, probably 3 times the size of Baldwin County. To put it in perspective, the state of Alabama is 52,519. So Alabama is 5 times the size of Judah. Okay, so this is not a very big space. It's big enough, but it's not that big of a space. It's about 5,000 square miles. You will also notice, you can't really see this completely on the map in front of you. You will see it in future weeks of maps that come out. But the total area that's allotted to Judah here is more than a third of the total area in Canaan. In fact, in my calculations, it actually approaches half of the total space on the western side of the Jordan is occupied by this tribe. It's larger than any other tribe's allocation, including if you were to combine the two half-tribes of Manasseh and the space that they are allocated on one side and the other of the Jordan. Judah is still larger than all of those. Now, I suspect that the reason why the 2,300 number is used is because only about 2,300 square miles of this 5,000 is actually inhabited by the people of Judah. When they eventually, in the book of Judges, move into this territory, they're really only going to take about half of the total space. Part of the reason is because much of this territory is uninhabitable. There's not a lot of living space in that south end where that ark is down there. It's mostly wilderness. So the number of people per square mile is going to be very small because there's not a lot of grazing land there to work with. There's not a lot of land to plant crops that are going to grow. Secondly, we know that the area just to the west of the Dead Sea, which used to be very fertile, is now dead. I mean, we call it the Dead Sea for a reason, because God rained down judgment upon the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah in that space long before now. And so what was a fertile valley around the Dead Sea is now, well, dead. And so there's not much space to inhabit there. We also know that there are other spaces in this territory that are difficult to live in. And so only about 2,300 miles is actually inhabited by Judah. An additional point to notice is that the tribe of Simeon will be allotted space within the area of Judah. In fact, if you look on your map, you will see like a circle in the middle of it that says Simeon. It's got some hash lines in it to let you know where it is, give or take. Simeon is going to be allotted space within the area of Judah because the allotment, according to chapter 19 and verse 9 of this book, is too large for Judah. It's specifically going to be noted that the amount of space allocated to Judah is too big for them, and so the lot will fall in such a way that Simeon will actually wind up being embedded in Judah later. We'll talk about what happens to Simeon when we get to that allocation in chapter 19. The inhabitants of Judah will, after the death of Joshua, as I said, conquer many of the natives. But they will still be limited to the hill country in the east and the Shephelah. Now let's talk about where those two are. If you look at your map, you will notice that along the Dead Sea, there is a ridge of mountains that basically runs from the northeast to the southwest. All right, that's the hill country. It continues up to the north into the other tribes, but that's the hill country. Most of Judah is going to wind up in that space, going to wind up in that hill country area. In fact, most of Israel is going to wind up in the hill country during the days of the judges. So they're going to be pushed into that particular territory. They will conquer a number of cities. They will come in and they will continue the conquest under Joshua in evicting natives, but they're really going to wind up being limited to the hill country. But they're also going to be limited to the Shephelah. Now the Shephelah is the space off the hill country coming down to the west. It's a small area moving to the west out of that hill country, basically in the center of that allocation, largely where Simeon is, but in that space is known as the Shephelah. Shephelah means valley. And so there's a valley there that the people of Judah will also be able to occupy. But they're not going to be able to push much further to the west. And the reason why is because the Philistines own that space. The Philistine cities of Gaza and Ashkelon and Ashdod are being occupied by Philistines, and the people of Judah will not be able to dislodge them. In fact, it will take all the way till David's day before he is finally able to conquer the Philistines along the coast. So the people of Judah coming in at this particular time, which is at least 400 years before David, they're going to be kind of shoved into that hill country and a little bit of the valley to the west. So they're going to occupy half, at best, of this amount of space once they begin to move in. So those are the boundaries, and that's where the area of Judah is going to be. But I want to just note one more thing with you in relation to this allotment. And that is, Judah, the tribe of Judah, is the most important tribe of Israel politically. The most important tribe of Israel politically is the tribe of Judah. Now, I am convinced that Levi is the most important tribe spiritually. We've already seen the favoritism of God where he has granted to the Levites the privilege of being the Levitical priest to serve alongside the family of Aaron in the tabernacle. So Levi is clearly the most important tribe from God's perspective spiritually. He gives him that great honor. But Judah becomes the most important politically in the history of Israel moving forward. Think about all of the things that are true of the tribe of Judah. We know, for example, that Judah bore the greatest king of Israel. David comes from the line of Judah. Judah, the tribe, became, along with Benjamin and what's left of Simeon, became the southern kingdom of Israel when the kingdom was split after the days of Solomon. So even after David rises to the throne and hands a great empire over to his son, Solomon, who builds a great temple in Jerusalem, his son, Rehoboam, I call him Rehoboam the idiot, decided to allow this kingdom to split, and so Judah becomes an entire nation of its own. It becomes the southern kingdom of Israel. Judah then, as a separate nation from the northern tribes, lasts 150 years longer than the northern kingdom during the days of the exiles. You remember the northern kingdom, headquartered at Samaria, and all their wicked kings went into captivity in around 722 BC, but the line of Judah, in which God granted a number of good kings along the way, survived not going into exile until almost 586. That's 150 years different. So Judah is going to be much more important because there are going to be a succession of good kings. Some good kings in the nation allow them to last longer. And Judah is the only tribe that returns from the exile. You remember in the days of Ezra and Zerubbabel and Nehemiah and others that 50,000 or so come back from Babylon under Cyrus's great decree to reestablish the city of Jerusalem, to rebuild the temple, to rebuild the wall, and to reestablish Israel as a nation. Judah is the only tribe that returns. All of the others disappear into history. They're all gone, except for the tribe of Judah. And Judah, as a tribe, becomes the eventual Roman province of Judea in the southern part of Palestine when the Romans conquer and take this land from the Greeks. It will become, in fact, the territory of record in Palestine, because the city of Jerusalem within the territory of Judea will become the place where the various governors of this territory will live. Yes, there is territories to the north of Samaria and Galilee that will be reestablished, but they're theoretically not really Jewish. In fact, the Samarian territory in the middle is a hybrid of various people repopulated by the Assyrians when they captured Samaria, the northern kingdom, in 722, and even the territory of Galilee is not really Jewish. I mean, we think of it as that, and it's embraced by the Jewish people, but in many ways, even Galilee was considered to be outside of Judaism in many ways, which is, I think, one of the reasons why Jesus spent so much time in Galilee, and particularly why he was raised in Galilee. So Judah is the most important tribe politically. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't add one more point to that, and that is that the Messiah, Jesus Christ, also comes from the tribe of Judah. He was born not of the tribe of Levi, but born of the tribe of Judah. Born to both parents, descended from David, and even in the town of David's birth in Judea. So Judah is given all of this territory. Now, let's skip over that middle part, as I said, and jump to the last set of verses, all of verses 20 to 63. And my plan is for the ladies to bring in lunch, because we're going to be looking at all of these cities one after another. I want to tell you a little bit about each city, where it is, a little bit about its history, what happened to it, etc. So it's going to be several hours of work that we're going to need to do. Nobody ran screaming from the room, so I guess it must be acceptable. We're not going to do that. The list that you see in verses 20 to 63 is comprised of the major cities allocated to Judah in the territory above. Okay? It's simply a listing of all of the various places in the areas of in Judah that were given to that particular tribe. There were 116 cities listed in the list. 116 names in the list. And that does not include the various villages and towns around these various cities. In other words, these are the population centers, the city-states all around Judah, which were surrounded by a number of villages and towns around each one. That was kind of typical. So the list is only including the city names. Now, let me be clear that you understand something here. Most of the names in this list are unknown to modern scholars. We don't really know where they are. It's pure guess as to where any of them are. There's a few of them that we can learn about archaeologically, but fundamentally the vast majority of these cities are unknown. And many of the names that you see mentioned in this section overlap with the names of cities in other territories. What was true about Canaan at the time of Joshua changed over time. I mean, it always does, right? Everything changes over time. And so what you have here is a listing at the moment that this allocation is made where these various cities are, but things will change in Canaan over time, which is one of the reasons why it's hard to find many of these cities. We're not sure where they are because people move, things change. And because many of them are conquered and burned to the ground, it's sort of hard to find them after that has happened to them. And so we don't really know everything about it. But in this list, there are 4 cities that deserve special notice. 3 of them I've already mentioned. Ekron, Ashdod, and Gaza, in 45 to 47, are coastal cities. They're coastal cities. They're occupied by the Philistines. Now you will notice in verses 45 to 47, there's a slight difference in how these 3 cities are recorded. In all of the other verses, as the cities are grouped together and listed, the writer includes a count of how many are included in the list he just gave you. All right, so if you look, for example, in verses 33 through 36, a number of cities, right? And then at the end of verse 36, it says 14 cities with their villages. See it again at the end of verse 41, 16 cities with their villages. Verse 44, 9 cities with their villages. Which leads then to verse 45, Ekron, all by itself in one verse, with Ashdod. And then in 47, Ashdod with its towns and villages, Gaza with its towns and villages. But you will notice in those 3 verses, there is no mention of a number. They're each mentioned individually. Why? I think the best explanation as to why is because, from Joshua's perspective, they're not going to be occupied anytime soon. Joshua probably knows that. He knows that they're occupied by Philistines that are not going to be easily ejected from their towns. And so he simply includes their names because they belong within the territory, right? They're along the western coast of the Mediterranean, eastern coast of the Mediterranean, the western part of Judah, right? So they're a part of the territory, they're part of the boundaries, but they're probably not going to wind up being occupied. So they're listed separately as Philistine cities. Jerusalem is also included in the list, verse 63, all the way to the end of the chapter. In this case, again, Joshua does the same thing as I just mentioned. He includes Jerusalem in the list, but it's not technically in Judah, as we've already discovered, right? But it's recorded here that the Jebusites dwell with the people of Judah when the book is written. Notice how it says at the end. So the Jebusites dwell with the people of Judah at Jerusalem to this day. So as Joshua's writing this book, he says, look, yes, the city of Jerusalem is going to wind up being actually in the territory of the Benjamites, but the people of Jerusalem actually live more with the people of Judah than they do with the people of Jerusalem. Okay, it's a border town, which means that the people in the city actually probably wind up doing the most of their farming and grazing of their animals and so forth to the south of the city, in territory that's fertile rather than to the north, and therefore they're more in with the people of Judah than they are with the people of Benjamin. Plus the fact that there's probably some anticipation already on the part of Joshua here that this territory is not going to be clearly demarcated like a straight border line. It's going to be a bouncing back and forth, and we know historically that that's in fact what happens. You remember that this city becomes a centrally located capital established by David because it sits in that sort of gray area between Benjamin and Judah above. And so Joshua includes it, even though it's technically not in Judah. Joshua lists cities throughout the land allocated to Judah. It is a message to the people of Judah that the entirety of this land belongs to them because God had given it to them as a part of his covenant promise. The message of Joshua and the others is to say, listen, you who are part of the tribe of Judah, this land is your land. God has given you this space. Yeah, it's true, you won't be able to dislodge all the natives that are living there, and you're not going to be able to occupy it all. You're going to wind up living in the hill country. But you know what? It's still your land. It still all belongs to you. This is land that God has given to you to live in. It has been allocated to them by Yahweh. He has given it to them, and he's going to make you into a great nation in this place, as I said earlier. You are going to live in this land. It's going to be your land. You are the first tribe being given an allocation. You are being given an allocation bigger than all the other tribes. You're being given more space than all the other tribes. You are the largest of all the tribes, and that's because Yahweh has predetermined that. God has set that in motion. It's a message to the people of Judah that this is their land as a part of God's covenant promise to Abraham, now being fleshed out specifically to them. Which then takes us back to the middle story, starting in verse 13 and going to verse 19. What you see in these 7 verses is a continuation of the story that began in chapter 14. Now you remember back in chapter 14 that when Caleb, that at some point before the allocation begins, Caleb, one of the 12 spies, comes to Joshua and the others and says, you owe me some land. The Lord promised me some space. You remember that I was one of only 2 men that were faithful to the Lord in going into the land and spying it out. I'm one of the 2, like you, Joshua, who said, yes, we could take this land. Yeah, there's giants in it, but who cares? Our God is stronger than them, so let's go in and take it. And I was the only one outside of Joshua who believed that we should go in and take these land. The other 10 said, no, we can't do it. And so God cursed that generation. But he made a promise to me. And the promise he made to me was that he was going to give me some space. And here I am, I'm 85 years old now, and I'm still around, I'm still kicking, I'm still breathing, I'm still as strong as I was back in those days. And so give me the land. Okay, so we saw the beginning of that process where Joshua allots him some land. But the story picks up here because the land that was given to Caleb is within the boundaries of Judah. Okay, so it fits within the discourse here about the allotment to Judah. This is simply Joshua picking up the story and saying, okay, as a part of this allotment process, Caleb has already gotten some land in this space. Now, the territory that is spoken of here, particularly around the city of Hebron, is located at the northern end of the Negev, verse 19, near the city of Hebron. You can see it on your map. It's up at the top part of Judah. This is where Caleb went. Because Caleb occupies his territory even before Joshua's death, is another reason why this is included. This is written here as a part of the actual process of allocation, but Caleb has already gone in and taken his land. He's already gone in and began to take what was his. The rest of Judah has not. The rest of Judah is only getting their space defined, but Caleb is actually living it out. He's actually going into this space. So Joshua writes about Caleb's success in this space. The other tribes coming in later, as I said, is a success story. It is a success story. According to chapter 14, verse 12, Caleb says, I'm going to go in, I'm going to take this land, I'm going to trust the Lord that He is going to give me this land, that He's going to allow me to overthrow the enemies living in this space. Remember, we talked about this last week, that he was a man of faith. He trusted in the promise of God. He went into this land with the full belief that God was going to give it to him. Okay. Caleb, according to this story then, is able to drive out the people descended from the 3 sons of Anak. Verse 13, according to the commandment of the Lord to Joshua, he gave to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, a portion among the people of Judah. Kiriath Arba, that is, Hebron. Arba was the father of Anak. Remember, this Kiriath Arba is the city of Arba. So this Arba fellow is apparently the guy who occupied this space at one time. His name implies that he was part of the Anakim, which means that he was one of those giants that the Israelites had seen in the land that terrified them. Caleb went, yeah, all right, whatever, we can still take him. All right, so back to the very place that the spies had started shivering, Caleb comes in and says, this is the place. Now, notice verse 14. And Caleb drove out from there the 3 sons of Anak, Sheshi, Ahiman, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak. Okay, so Anak is long gone, probably, at this point. The tribes are listed as from the 3 sons of Anak, very much like Judah was the son of Jacob, and now Judah is long gone, right? But his descendants are now here. Same thing here. Anak is long gone. The 3 sons of Anak are long gone, but the descendants of the 3 sons are now living in this space. So it's not just 3 guys, it's a whole group of people who are descended from these 3 men. And it says that Caleb is able to drive out these 3 sons. Now, I'm inclined to believe, you can disagree with me if you want, but I'm inclined to believe that based on Caleb's statement that he made to Joshua, that it was God who gave him the power to overcome these enemies. Or let me put it like this. God gave an 85-year-old man the power to lead a military force to dislodge a bunch of giants in the land. That's what I think happened. Caleb was given by virtue of his continuing strength, which I'm convinced comes from God, and a strength of military might, which I think was given to him by God, to go and overthrow these various enemies and boot them out of this space, to destroy them, so that he could live in this land. So he does that. But there's a second thing that he does, and it's listed in verse 15. And he went up from there against the inhabitants of Debir. Now the name of Debir formerly was Kiriath Sepher, the city of Sepher. And Caleb said, whoever strikes Kiriath Sepher and captures it, to him I will give Achsah my daughter as wife. All right, so what does he do? After he has completed his conquest of the land of the Anakim, he turns his attention to another city called Debir, the city of Sepher, verse 15. Joshua had originally dealt with this city during the southern campaign. If you go back to chapter 10, verses 38 and following, you see that Joshua, as part of that southern campaign, had already attacked and dislodged the city of Debir. So Caleb is coming into a place where there's still probably natives in that land around those cities, still living in the space, just like the rest of the territory of Judah. So Caleb comes, but he doesn't take up the fight himself. He doesn't take up the fight himself. This time, he offers it to somebody else. He gives unto someone else an opportunity to take up the fight. And he offers his daughter as a reward. Maybe she was a beautiful girl and a good prize. I don't know. Here's what I do know. Othniel, who was the son of Kenaz, who was the brother of Caleb, is the one who captures it and takes it. In other words, Othniel's, Caleb's nephew, the son of his brother, right? That would be his nephew. Othniel, Kenaz's son, the brother of Caleb, takes this land and captures it for himself. Now, that name may be familiar to you. Othniel may be familiar to you. He is the first judge in Israel during the days of the theocracy. You only have to go forward to Judges chapter 3 to see him. Once the people of Judah come in and begin to take the land, and then they get captured by a foreign king to the north, the Lord then sends a judge to release them from this, and his name is Othniel. He is the one mentioned here. And it says in that section, Judges 3, 7-11, that the Spirit of the Lord was upon him. That God worked through him as a judge to release the people of Israel in those days of oppression. So Caleb grants his daughter to this man. And additionally, as the story continues, that she comes to her father, Caleb, and says, okay, I'm marrying this man, or I have married this man, and you've given me some space, we've taken some space, but we're going to need more than just the space. We're going to need some wells, because this is a fairly dry territory. We're going to need some wells. Would you grant me that? And Caleb grants to his daughter several springs of water in the Negev as a blessing. I'm convinced it is a wedding gift to her and Othniel. That Caleb cedes to her what would be necessary for them to live in this wilderness. You could say, and get away with it, that the faithfulness of Caleb prepares what would be necessary for the future of Judah. The judge they're going to need to come and protect the people of Judah when this foreign nation comes and oppresses them is being taken care of even now by Caleb in establishing his new son-in-law as in this space. Okay, so as Perry would say right about here, I notice he's not in here to poke me on this, so what? He's a man of few words, but most of them are good. So what? Now, I will confess, there's a lot of times when I'm reading Joshua where the application is just easy. It's just, okay, this is it. But this one's not so much so. But a thought crossed my mind as I was reading this text. Right? What you have here is Joshua defining the boundaries of where a tribe is going to be, right? And then specifying all the various cities that are included in it in order to say, this is all your land, this is all your cities, this is all your space. And then there's this little embedded story in the middle of it about a man, aged man, who is successfully able to carry out capturing the various places that he was promised by God and giving even to a new son-in-law, which is also his nephew, a piece of land to occupy in anticipation of what will come. Okay, as I'm reading all of that, a verse of Scripture came to my mind. And it was something that the Apostle Paul says to the Athenian philosophers when he arrives at Mars Hill, the Areopagus, in Athens, during his second missionary journey. And these words come to mind, Acts 17, verse 26. And he made, that is, and God made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, and here's the key part, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling places. End quote. Paul says to the Athenian philosophers, you know what? Everyone lives where they live because God has ordained it. Everyone is what he is because God, the sovereign, has ordained it. Our station in life, whatever that might be, where we live, how old we live to be, how prosperous we become, how intelligent we are, our physical strength or weakness, and the list on and on ad nauseum, all of that is determined by God according to his purposes. The sovereign God ultimately determines who we are and where we come from. Now, I realize that there are whole swaths of American Christianity that want you to believe that your destiny is in your hands. You simply do what you're supposed to do. God does his part, you do your part, and your destiny is determined by whether or not you do your part or not. But even the synergist has to admit that there are many things about us that we had no decision in. I was born June the 28th, 1960, in a hospital in St. Paul, Minnesota. Was that my decision? I was born to parents who, at the time, had little money. I was the eldest of three, and they never gave me a part of the decision about whether or not those other two should be a part of the family. Much which I rue even to this day. I was 4 years old when my brother was born. I should have had a vote, don't you think? But I did not. And the fact is that, yes, Deb and I have lived in like 27 different places over the course of our married life, and we would like to believe that we moved to all those places because we decided to do so, but in reality, many of the choices of the places that we live were determined by circumstances outside of our control in many ways. I remember vividly when my boss in Minneapolis came to me and said, "We have been bought out by a company in Birmingham, Alabama. You have two choices. You can lose your job or move to Birmingham." Doesn't seem like much of a choice to me. So we moved to Birmingham and spent 13 years in that city. The fact of the matter is that it is the sovereign God ultimately determines who we are and where we come from. See, it's the sovereign God who gave me these unbelievable good looks and this charming personality and this amazing brain. It's God who gave that, see, to me. I'm delusion too. God gave me that as well. But it's the sovereign God who gets to decide these things. So as I'm thinking about the Apostle Paul and what he's saying, and I'm connecting that to God saying to the people of Judah, "This is your land," here's the message that comes to my heart. And it's something my wife has said to me many times. She gets credit for this one. Flower wherever you are planted. Flower wherever you are planted. The flower, the seed that falls to the ground and produces a flower, doesn't get a choice as to where it is, and really never gets a choice to move, does it? It only has one choice, and that is to do what it was created to do. It is a reminder to us that we need to be useful to the kingdom of God no matter what our circumstances are. Now let me say that again because it didn't strike you hard enough. We need to be useful to the advancement of the cause of Christ in the world no matter what our current circumstances are. The principle is like this. The station of life that you are experiencing is a part of God's larger plan. While you are in where you're living now, what you're doing now, all of the other things that are happening to you in your life, whether they be good or evil, all that is happening to you has been purposed by God. Now you can do like Jesus says to Paul, you can kick against that, Acts 26:14. Right? It's hard for you to kick against the goads, Paul. Jesus says to Paul, as Paul is being converted and drawn to faith in Christ, "Oh, you can kick against it all you want to. But the fact is, it's been determined. I, the Lord, determine where a man lives and what a man is and what the circumstances of his life are." You can kick against it or you can embrace it. You can kick against it, or you can embrace it. To flower where you are planted is to say, you know what? This is the lot the Lord has cast me in. My choice is to either kick against it by being constantly angry with God that this is my circumstances, or I can choose to flower in this place. I can choose to be useful to God in this place. Caleb was given a land. What did he do? He flowered in the place he was given. God said, here's where I'm going to give you. It's full of giants. But you know what? I am going to work through you that you will blossom in this place. In fact, I'm even going to establish that you, Caleb, will give your daughter to a man who will become a savior in Israel later. Caleb flowered where he was planted. He didn't whine over the situation and say, I wish God would give me a better place. The people of Judah didn't whine over the fact that they were given a territory that they could occupy only half of. Nope, they said, we're going to live here, and we're going to prosper in this place. And God prospered them until they became the most important tribe in Israel politically. Even bringing the Messiah himself through this very people. And this is how we have to think of our lives. We need to be useful to the advancement of his kingdom here and now. Yeah, I know. It's always easier to think that the grass is greener somewhere else. But let me tell you what Irma Bombeck once said. The grass is rarely greener on the other side of the fence except over the septic tank. We live in a wanderlust society, don't we? It's all about the next best thing. It's always about something newer and better. It's always something about, well, we can go someplace else and we can find something better. But so often I see people who are so desperately looking for the next best thing that they are wasting their lives even now. I think about so many in evangelicals, or particularly in fundamentalist circles, who are always talking about, the return of the Lord is going to be any day now. Right? Keep looking up because the rapture is just around the corner. Whatever that is. And they're so fundamentally fixated upon that they're no good in this modern world. They're ineffective because their eyes are always off at the horizon, looking to see what might be coming next. And how true this is in this generation where it's always about the next best thing, right? Oh, I can't be satisfied with the iPhone I have. There's a new one coming out. I need that one. Why? Is it going to make your life better? Are you going to be able to advance the cause of Christ better with that new iPhone? Probably not. We live in a wanderlust society. We live in a wanderlust culture, and we spend so much of our time looking for something better and newer, and we wind up wasting our lives. It seems that there are so many Christians who say, well, I just need to accomplish one more thing before I serve the Lord. Just a little more money in the bank maybe, or a better position in my job, or if I could just get through school, or if I could just maybe retire, then I'll have the time, and just a few more of this and a little more of that and some more of this, and then I'll be able to serve God. Always looking to the horizon. See, if I can just raise my kids and get them out of the house, then I'll be useful to the Lord, see. And if I can get a better job, make more money, these kinds of things, I'm going to be able to. But that's not flowering where you're planted. So let me ask you this question. In whatever situation the Lord has you now, what are you doing to help advance his kingdom? What are you doing right now to help advance the cause of Christ in the world? Are you just waiting for the right moment to come along? For just the perfect opportunity? When everything seems to fall into place? Or are you content to be a minister for the Lord in this moment? Because you see, no matter what your situation, your life is still useful. I'll give you an example as I close. There will be a few people on the camera that will recognize this. When I moved to Calvary to take on the job of being the pastor there in 2016, 17, 16, something like that. No, couldn't be. It had to be 10 years earlier than that. I remember vividly the very first Sunday that I walked into that church. There was a woman in the church whose name was Jenny. Jenny was 98 years old. She was up in Kearney, Nebraska at the time, either in the hospital or a nursing home. I think it was a nursing home at the time. And most of the congregation of Calvary didn't give her much hope of coming home. But she did. She came back to live in her house. And she lived to be 1 month short of her 106th birthday. For 6 years, this woman was a tremendous encouragement from the Lord. Every once in a while, in that first year while I was living there in Phillipsburg and Deb was still living in Minneapolis because our daughter was still finishing high school, I would drive up there and spend a week between Sundays. Jenny would call me from Phillipsburg to warn me that there was a blizzard on the way and that I should head out immediately in order to avoid the blizzard. A 100-year-old woman ministered to me. She was a woman whose circumstances, whose age, did not stop her from being an encouragement. Caleb was 85 years old, and he flowered where he was planted. Doesn't matter how old you are. Doesn't matter what your circumstances are. Doesn't matter what trouble you're having at the moment. Flower where you are planted. Be useful for the kingdom of God. He has allotted you your space in this time. Don't kick against it. Embrace it.